pretty exciting morning. It starts with a script, one of my favorite things we do at the festival. Let's start right away. Let me introduce Arndt Sorkin, The Social Network. Seidler, The Fighter. Seidler, The King's Speech. Charlie Mitchell, Get Low. Cholodenko, The Kids Are All Right. And Michael Arndt, Toy Story 3. And your moderator, Thompson, Thompson on Hollywood and IndieWire.
This is an incredible lineup, as always. I look forward to this panel every year because what we do is dig into the process a little bit. It's not just the sound bites that you've already become familiar with, but more about how these extraordinary screenplays, which are up for more awards and nominations and have won all sorts of things. I was just listening to David Seidler and Arndt Sorkin talk about what hotels to stay at in London for the BAFTAs coming up. This is what's really important. But we're going to go down to the very end there and start with Arndt Sorkin, who of course you know from all the television shows, The West Wing, Studios 60 on the Sunset Strip, and you have a new series, I understand, HBO coming up. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell us about that, just for the news of the moment.
I will. I have to say that it was, I accidentally announced it when I wasn't supposed to. I was in London last week doing a program called is it Breakfast with the BBC? BBC Breakfast? But you don't? I think it's Tea and Crumpets. Okay. And had just stepped off the plane and gone there, and we weren't supposed to announce it for a couple of weeks, but I went ahead and talked about it on the show anyway. It'll be, so I'll just say very little about it now, so I don't get in too much trouble. It'll be a new series for HBO that takes place behind the scenes, for a change, at a nightly cable news show where they have made a decision to try to do the news well.
Comedy series.
And they'll win sometimes and they'll lose.
So Aaron, back to the beginning. You apparently were shown a script, a treatment, a proposal, a pitch. Let's go all the way back. That you were so thrilled by that you called up your agent and said, I want to do this right away. What was it that grabbed you initially?
It was the pitch that you're talking about is Ben Messer wrote a 14-page book proposal for his publisher Random House about the origins of Facebook and the friction that took place at the beginning. Random House tried to get a simultaneous film deal set up, so they sent it out to Hollywood, and that's how it got in my hands. And you're right, I did say right away, it was as fast as I'd ever said yes to anything, I'm in. And what grabbed me wasn't that it was about Facebook. I really didn't then, nor do I now, know very much about Facebook at all. What grabbed me was that set against this very modern backdrop of this very modern invention was a story that was as old as storytelling itself. Of friendship and loyalty and betrayal and power and class and jealousy. These things that Aeschylus would have wanted to write about, Shakespeare would have wanted to write about. A few decades ago, Paddy Chayefsky would have wanted to write about, and it was just lucky for me that none of those guys were available, so I got it.
Scott Silver, you have quite a few screenwriting credits behind you, and The Fighter was one of these situations where various different people were involved. So give us a little bit of where you came in and what had already developed at that stage.
I was the fourth writer in, I think, on this, and a friend of mine, Darren Aronofsky, went on, obviously, The Black Swan, and I went to film school with, came to me and said if I would be interested in writing this. I'm from Worcester, which is 2 towns over from Lowell, where the movie takes place, and wow, thank you. Someone here from Worcester, what a chance of that. And I've boxed a little bit. Not very well, but so it was natural for me to sort of have some interest in it. And so that's sort of how I came forward with, there'd already been a number of drafts. And so it's sort of different from sort of how a lot of these things work out, especially to get to here. But there's a lot of people before me that sort of obviously did work.
But what would be the main, if you were to define the main difference between what you did and what had previously been done? How would you describe that?
Well, it's a compliment.
Yeah, it's
I went back and sort of, having been from there, I decided to go back and sort of interview. I sort of know those characters and know those people. So I went back to myself and sort of went and did my own interviews and talked to those guys, and Nikki and Alice and the sisters and stuff, and sort of went there and spent a few weeks in Lowell, and sort of I think took a lot of the ideas that were there in the first screenplay, and sort of had to sort of make it my own, but also sort of make it into what Darren wanted to do as a movie. So it was really sort of I'm trying to think of the best way to do that.
And after you and when David Russell came in, what was your relationship to the project?
Well, it's an also complicated story. We had to sort of change what was very specifically made for Darren, and sort of what his vision was for the movie, to make it a Darren Aronofsky movie in a very short time. I think we had about 2 months, or even less. I think we had to make it into a David O. Russell movie. We also had to cut about $50 or $60 million out of the budget. So it was sort of like this, clusterfuck of having to sort of get it done really fast. And I think the challenge, and certainly, I think you can, from the movie, you can see how much it is sort of David's sensibility,
sure,
and sort of David's rhythms and his perspective and his sense of humor on things. I think the heart of the story, I guess, had always been there from the very first draft. I think that the strength of the story is the strength of Mickey and Nicky and their relationship, what they did in reality, and that's sort of true. And I think that transcended every script that was there. And that was sort of, that story was so powerful, no matter who did it and how it was interpreted by whoever, that would have stayed. That was sort of, that heart was there. I think obviously they're very different filmmakers, so the challenge was to sort of make it David's movie, which he certainly did, but still keeping those elements I think were important to me sort of when I came aboard the project.
Good. David Seidler, you have had a long career. You were born in England, you came to America, you worked in Hollywood and television for a long time. You wrote Tucker for Francis Ford Coppola. And this story was something that you were drawn to from the very start of your life because you were a stutterer. What is the reason that it took so long for it to actually come to fruition? And what drove you to finally write it?
I'm a very slow writer. When I first seriously thought about writing it, which was in 1980, I had just written Tucker, the Man of His Dream for Francis. I was a very naive 40 years old. I came to Hollywood at 40, an age when any writer with any sense is thinking of leaving town. And when I wrote that script, I was naive enough to think that it would be made instantly, change my life forever, and I could write anything I wanted to in Hollywood. I certainly learned better than that. It took 10 years to get made, and it didn't change my life, and you can't write everything you want in Hollywood. But I started looking at Bertie because he'd been my childhood hero. I had studied from age 3 to 16. My parents had told me to listen to his speeches, that he was far worse than I, but look what he can do now. And I knew that as king, he was listened to syllable by syllable, often critically, and yet he had enough guts to do it, so I thought there was hope for me. So I always wanted to write something about George. I had no idea what the story was. That's all I knew was George. So I started reading, and there were these blips on the radar screen called Lionel Loeb, his speech therapist. Not much is written about him, even in the biographies. The royal stutter is an embarrassment. You must understand that stuttering was called until very recently a speech defect. So if you had a speech defect, you were ipso facto, a defective person. You couldn't have the King of England being called a defective person, so you don't talk about the stutter. But I could smell a story with Lionel Loeb, and I don't know if there are any reporters here, but you just sort of get a whiff of something. So I asked a friend in London to do a bit of research, I think it was looking in the telephone directory, and she found a surviving son, Valentine Lowe. In the film, he's the young chap with his nose always buried in the textbooks. And he had become an eminent brain surgeon at Harley Street. I'm sure much to his father's delight, because Lyme Law always felt sort of denigrated by the rather snobby British medical community. I wrote to him, and he wrote back and said, yes, come to London if you wish, I'll speak with you. And I have all the notebooks my father kept while treating the king. I thought, it's the mother lode. But he had a small caveat to his letter. He said, I'll do this, but first you must get written permission from the Queen Mother. And that's when my American friends realized, yes, I really am still a Brit at heart. I'm an American, I'm proud of it, but I'm a Brit by birth. So I wrote to the Queen Mom, and I got a lovely, crisp, cream-colored stationery envelope with a red stamp of Clara's house. And she said, dear Mr. Seidler, please, not during my lifetime. The memory of these events is still too painful. Well, I thought, all right, you know, if a Brit asks the Queen Mom's permission and she says, wait, you wait, or you go to the Tower of London. But I didn't think I'd have to wait very long. She was an elderly lady. I thought, 25 years later, at age 100, almost 102, she finally left this mortal realm. So that's why it took a little while to get started.
So Charlie, you were working with a partner on Get Love. This is based on a true figure, but how true, how real is this man that Robert Duvall was playing in Get Love? Is he a phantom or? Yeah.
But all we really knew about him was that he had this funeral, he invited everybody to come. And that's really all we had. There was some mystery about him, but he never revealed what it was. It was supposedly somewhere back in his youth he had done something really bad, which had caused him to, you know, withdraw from the world. But what that was, we never knew that. We had to invent that.
So you were working away, you know, in the indie world on what was a modest script. I mean, did you have any idea that you would end up landing the cast that you did and that it would get the kind of attention that it got?
Interesting question. Went to Mr. Duvall's house in Virginia. Went out on the back porch and we were sitting out there and talking about the character and talking about the school. And sometime during those 2 days we spent on the back porch, something happened. And we both decided that this was a story we had to tell. And I think we would have done anything to make it happen. And I know I looked at him, he certainly stepped up and proved that.
You sure did. Lisa, you ended up taking a long time to write The Kids Are All Right as well, some five years. And you got Julianne Moore attached very, very early on. Can you talk about how the original idea of the movie changed over those 5 years, and whether the period of time that it took to actually deliver the movie made it a better movie in the end?
I'm so glad you didn't ask me how the original idea came about. Like, everybody in this room probably has heard that story. I started writing it on my own, kind of based on experiences that I was going through in my own life, with trying to start a family. I ran into my co-writer, Stuart Blumberg, who I wish was here, but it's on the East Coast. We had a great chance encounter in a restaurant near my house called the 101 Cafe, where I would sit every day and kill time and eat French toast. He walked in one day. I hadn't seen him in quite some time. I had moved to LA about a year or two earlier from New York. And he was still in New York, and he walked in, and it was just, you know, one of those old acquaintances that you know and admire, but you don't have any real, you know, history with. And he sat down and we started talking about what we were doing and our careers and, you know, next steps and this and that. I told him about this script that I had just begun, but here I was, you know, stalling and eating French toast, and I guess I was hitting a wall early on. And I told him that it was about this family and these teenage kids, and one of them was coming of age and on her own, kind of in sort of secrecy, was digging around to find her sperm donor father. And Stuart just sort of spontaneously said, "Oh wow, I was a sperm donor in college." And it was like one of those revelation moments, because I'd been thinking conceptually about sperm donors for a long time and never had met a real live, you know, animated human male sperm donor, and there he was right in my face, and I actually knew him and liked him, and he's handsome and bright and the rest of it. And based on that, and based on kind of things that we were saying to each other in this conversation, one being unsolicited, he said to me, "You know, I think you come up with these great character studies and stories and stuff, but I would love to see you push out a little bit and become, you know, kind of take your stuff in a more commercial vein," which I, of course, took offense to. And then I said to him, "You know,
the first film was called High Art."
Right, and a cult classic for those that live in downtown New York. And I said to him, "You know, I think you got great comedic chops, and, you know, I think that you do structure great, and, you know, here you are writing and rewriting studio films, but I really think it's time for you to start digging deeper." So, you know, based on the sperm donor and what I was going through and, you know, this and that, and trying to start a family, and him needing to dig deeper and me needing to push wider, I just spontaneously said, oh wow, this could be an antidote to all this loneliness of screenwriting. Hey Stu, do you want to write this movie with me? And I guess he was in the same state of mind, and he sort of signed up right there in the coffee shop. So part of the reason why it took so long to write it was that he primarily was still living on the East Coast, so I was on the West Coast, and we would have to make these appointments. I didn't want to Skype it in, and I didn't, you know, the point to me of writing with another writer was the synergy, all the ineffable stuff that you get by sitting next to another human being, and what comes out of that, just, you know, sort of energetically beyond the words. And so I wanted to wait till when we could spend time together. So months would go by in between these, you know, 2-3 week periods where we would, you know, plot out time to sit and try to push through a draft. So I'm going to try to cut to the chase here, which is we got through a first draft. It was long. It was involved a river rafting trip. It was very expensive. We liked it, but nobody wanted to make it. And we had to go back to the drawing board. The next detour was I had a child. I had to take some time out to do that project. And in terms of Anne's question, that was a great time out, because it really fortified my, you know, commitment to the subject and to the, you know, kind of machinations of what this couple was going through. It was my girlfriend and I, and we had this child, and with an anonymous sperm donor, so here I was finally, you know, living my part of the arrangement. He had already been a sperm donor, but I had to kind of fulfill my end of it. And so, you know, you go on, and you keep writing drafts, and you keep trying to make them tight, and meanwhile, you're waiting for your partner to come to the next coast or be able to travel, and things marinate and start, you know, the truth and the falsity of what you've written, the authenticity, the level of understanding of your characters and of your plot. I think that's something that really time is the thing that brings that to focus. And so while I was wringing my hands, it was taking so much time, in the end, in retrospect, that was kind of the biggest gift of it all, that we had all that time to reflect on each draft.
Yes, I'm very aware that what I do as a blogger is very different from what you all do. It's taking a very long time to hone and polish. And Michael, you're yet another example of this. Over after you did Little Miss Sunshine and won the Oscar for your first produced screenplay. Once before. for, you then went up to Pixar. You went north and joined this sort of hive mind, and yet you still have a single screenplay credit for Toy Story 3. So what was the biggest, you had these beloved characters that everybody really loved. You were writing a sequel, and you had to take this sort of pitch that they gave you and turn it into something real. What would be the biggest difference between what that initial hive mind creation was and what you ended up with at the end?
Just to sort of correct the chronology, I actually was first contacted by Pixar when, in the summer of 2005, when Little Miss Sunshine was still being shot. So they called me up when I was an unproduced screenwriter, and I first went up and interviewed and got hired by them in September of 2005. So that was before we had even been accepted at Sundance. So I just felt very lucky to be there. It wasn't as though I won. Little Miss Sunshine came out, and then I joined Pixar. It was really I joined Pixar, and then Little Miss Sunshine came out. And I was just happy to be there. I mean, I was so happy. I mean, I sort of spent 10 years sitting alone in my apartment in Brooklyn writing, and so to be invited to come up, aboard this incredible company, and just work collaboratively with other writers, I just thought I have to do this. And just to answer your question very briefly, they went away and they came back. The guys who had written the original Toy Story movies went away for 2 days, and they had sort of a retreat, and they came up with sort of the real strong foundation of the movie, which was the beginning. I think that the smartest decision they made was the first decision, which was that they were going to let screen time elapse in real time, so that it would have been 11 years since the last movie, and basically 11 years would have gone by, so that Andy's grown up, and the toys are now facing a real problem. John Lasseter said that if you're a toy and you get broken, you can get fixed, and if you get lost, you can be found, but if your kid grows up, there's no sort of solution to that. And it's a great thing, because I think as a storyteller, you're always looking for a problem that to give to your character that the audience doesn't see a clear or easy solution to. And then they came back and they gave me the middle was that they donate themselves to daycare, and then initially it looks great, and then it turns out it's not so great. And then, the end was, and this was also really crucial, was, to make this decision that, the end of the story was Andy was going to give all his toys away, sort of one by one to this little girl named Bonnie. And I just felt like I was so lucky at the beginning of the process, or we were also lucky to have those three building blocks, and especially the ending, especially something that you always had a flag planted on the horizon. You always knew that you were going there, and so however the detours we took, we always knew exactly where we were going. Just in a nutshell, like for example, the third act of the film. Now in the film, they go to the landfill. That wasn't in the original conception. It was a scramble to get home in the third act, which we ended up throwing away. The hardest thing, though, was just figuring out what the arc of your hero's story is, and I mean, Woody is essentially the hero of the movie. What does he learn in the course of the story? And it's really tricky if you're doing a third film, of a character who's already sort of as well defined as sort of Buzz or Woody. In the first film, Woody has to realize that he's sort of an only child, or he's the favorite, he's Andy's favorite, and then he has to realize that he has to share the spotlight. And developmentally, that tracks with a kid who's 5 or 6 years old. And then in the second film, he actually has to come to terms with his mortality. He has to realize, someday I'm going to get worn out, I'm going to get thrown away. And that developmentally tracks with a kid who's 8 or 9 years old. And so it was really hard thinking, okay, what new lesson can this character learn in the course of the third story? Because it has to feel like a real story. It has to feel like you've really solved something, or he's really gotten a new perspective on life. And it took a long time, and a lot of conversations around in the story room to figure out, he's always said, and it's funny, I always feel like, you guys are probably the same with you guys, your answer is almost always already there in the story. So in the original movies, Woody keeps insisting our job is to be there for Andy, our job is to be there for Andy, and he's equating love with always being there. And so, to make a long story short, we got to the end, and Woody has to overhear his mom saying to Andy, I wish I could always be there with you, and Andy saying, you will be, Mom. And that way you shift from sort of a literal sense of always being there for somebody to a figurative sense. And Woody finally learns that he can love somebody and let them go. He learns about the impermanence of things. He learns about moving on. But it took a long time and a lot of meetings to really figure out. And the nice thing is that developmentally tracks with someone who's older, with someone who's essentially a teenager. So that now if you look at the arc of all three stories, it really feels like Woody's gone from being a very immature sort of 5-year-old to being sort of a grown-up.